I'm not ready to say goodbye. I understand that the story is finished, but man, crazy, stupid podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. As you can see, we're in a new locale. Adrian has worked hard these past few days to set up this beautiful, beautiful recording space for us. And it looks really cool.
Appreciate that.
Anyways, today we are here to discuss the last act of Arcane.
Side note, just a bit of a spoiler. If you haven't watched these last few episodes of Arcane, please do so now.
I know you said that we're going to get like spin-offs, so we'll still see the world.
But these specific
characters, I am very attached to it. I feel like I did not get enough time.
I know. I think there were a few other places where they could have maybe spent some time. Too. Like with Mel and her story and the Black Roses, we could have spent a little bit more time there. Maybe getting some flashbacks with Medarda and what actually happened there as opposed to the exposition. I think, for probably a number of reasons, they wanted to wrap up the story, but I think fans would have been okay with that going there. And maybe even getting like a little bit of like more flashbacks of that first revolution with Vander, Silco, and Viant and Jinx's parents.
Like, you're just talking about stretching out this season a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm talking I want more seasons.
Well, what I'm saying is this could have been broken up into 2. So I'm saying we could have maybe gotten 3 seasons, and I think people would have felt a little bit better with it. Because it's like we waited like 3 years just for it to get one more, and then that's it.
Yeah.
The story is incredible. This isn't a knock or a flaw in anything related to the story itself. It's just that for us as a viewer, it's just like, we just got you back.
Yeah, that's literally how it feels. That's literally how it feels. But yes, very, very well done. Yeah. Very well done season. I have only one issue.
Uh-oh.
And then I won't bring it up again, but I just have to say it.
Okay.
It's not unique to Arcane. But this idea that a lot of like stories and writers use wherein they have like a conflict between 2 groups of people, and then in the last act they introduce like a greater threat
to bring them all together.
I don't like. It's not my favorite personally.
I feel that.
It's not my favorite personally. I mean, I think it was still a very beautiful story, very well told, and also that's not my personal favorite, and I feel like it happens a lot because it's like kind of a neat way to solve the issue that we've spent the majority of the show just exploring, but it always leaves me a little bit unsatisfied because I don't think we've ever really seen that replicated in real life.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's ever how these issues really get solved. So it always feels like a little bit of a cop-out to me of like, ooh, I don't know.
I feel that. I noticed it a little bit, but with getting Savika added to the council helped me out with that. Primarily because outside of Caitlyn, no one else was happy that she was at that table. All the other people were giving her looks, which to me tells me like, okay, the problem is still kind of there. They didn't solve it, in like one season, which gives the implication that like with her and Vi still being there, there's like a lot of work still to be done.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying though.
This is also what they did in Children of Blood and Bone in the last book.
Oh, yeah, that's what you were bothered about.
Yeah, like the series is about like this conflict within this group of people, and then they find out that there's like this other group of people it's basically like the transatlantic slave trade, low key. And like, and it was just like, whoa.
I wasn't expecting that.
It wasn't like literally, but it was like, this culture of people that seemed kind of like Viking-esque, sort of. Like showing up on the shores of a group that was based off of Nigeria and like stealing them and putting them on boats and like taking, like it was like a lot. Anyways, but yeah, that's just not. Yeah, it's not my favorite, but it didn't like ruin it for me.
I'd agree.
Once it happened, I was like, okay, this is the route that we're going to take. It's okay. And then I think they did a really good job in that route. And I do like what I noticed that too with Savika.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is, it's like a helpful nod.
Yeah.
It just still kind of feels like, I don't know, you spent so much of the show deeply exploring this and then like you just give it a nod.
Well, I think what made it a little bit easier for me was it didn't come out of left field. The idea of the Hextech being an existential threat had been introduced literally like a couple episodes in the first season.
Yeah.
Which I think might be a little bit different than, I haven't read Children of Blood and Bone, but it sounds different than what you're describing.
It's definitely different.
Yeah.
And like narratively, it fit better for sure. But yes, that's all I'll say about that. No other complaints from me. I had to get it off my chest. Let's dive in. First, I'd just like to say, didn't I tell you Jayce went to the future?
You did call that. You did call it. When we watched that episode the first time, I was like, oh, I'm surprised you didn't gloat about that while we were watching. Okay, well, now you're gloating now. So.
Sometimes I choose humility. That whole first episode was just so good to me, like so satisfying, because we are not going to get to see Zaun, right, as like with the characters that we have gotten to know. It seems like there's some sort of implication that now something like that is in the works for them, but like we won't get to see it and witness it. It was very satisfying to see a world in which Silco and Vander's, whole dream and vision actually came to life, and to see it like healthily. And I found that like healing.
Especially because there's so much tragedy with both of them. I think I really liked that episode because of Ekko and Jinx. Primarily because it didn't feel out of left field. It didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. And I think it's because, to an extent, you could make the case that Jinx and Ekko suffered the most. Because as the story unfolds in season 1, they're still stuck in Zaun. And they're still having to live with the reality of what's happening in that town. And they're honestly still having to live with the rule of Silco, who, with all of, his ambitions, was not doing the greatest. You see it very clearly with, one, how Ekko went to go build his, his new place. And two, Powder looks extremely healthier. Her eyes look cleaner. Her skin looks more healthier. Her personality's better. She can express herself a lot better. She's getting into painting, which very on brand with where you could see where her life go. And I think to an extent, they were either forgotten, quote unquote, forgotten by like people, or forgotten like narratively. Like when you were sort of introduced to Ekko, you don't revisit him until a few episodes later in season 1. And then you're reminded like, oh, he's suffering too. And the same way with Jinx/Powder, the first few episodes, you're seeing the grief from Vi's perspective. But then again, you're reminded, oh, Jinx is suffering as well because of what happened with Vander, which they made that point in this season to remind us of like, he's your father too. So I think seeing all of those things, I don't know, reminded me of like them matching together makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I agree too. It came out of left field for me in that like I didn't expect it. I wasn't expecting it, but it didn't feel out of place. It wasn't like jarring or it didn't feel unnatural.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things that they did in the first season made it make a lot of sense or made it fall into place. Like the scene that they did in season 1 with Ekko and Jinx fighting on the bridge, you don't get a lot of time with Ekko and Jinx together. Like you get almost none, really, up until these last few episodes. But that scene in and of itself established like this sort of child like relationship that they had when they were younger. Like they were age peers because everybody else she was with was much older than her. So it established that there is a lot of history. And then also I thought too about what you were saying of like Ekko's the only person that watched her transformation in real time. Yeah. Vander was gone. The two those boys that I never remember their names. Oh, that's
true. Yeah.
They're gone. Yeah. Vi is in prison.
Yeah.
So the only person, and the guy from the shop, he was gone.
Yeah.
So the only person who actually knew Powder and then watched her become Jinx is Ekko.
Yeah.
He's the only one.
Yeah.
So it made a lot of sense to me. I felt like the scene where they were dancing in this first episode, to me, reminded me of the scene on the bridge. Like something about it felt very similar.
Yeah. They were fighting on the bridge, but I don't want to say like, there was not like flirtation going on. But there was a bit of a dance happening.
Yeah.
Ekko would do something and Jinx would be impressed. She'd smile, give like a little bit of a laughing scoff, and then she would sort of respond back.
Yeah, there was like something there. And then I also think it was just the arc was so necessary for Ekko because he is the only person who saw her change in real time.
Yeah.
He's been the one person, not the one person, but he's been one of the people that's like, Powder's gone. Like, she is not in there. Like, he did not really have any faith that she could be brought back. And so I think this was a needed reminder for him that like Jinx was a creation of her surroundings, not something innate to Powder.
Yes.
He needed to see like, oh no, because like there's a lot of similarities between the Powder that we see in that alternate universe and Jinx. Like there's still a lot of similarities between them, their interests, the things that they're passionate about. It's just that they get pointed in very different directions. But he needed to be reminded of that, like, oh no, like she became this person because of circumstances, but it's not who she is at her core.
I also think this was a good growth for him to remind him of where he needs to prioritize his time, efforts, and energy. There's that scene when he takes Powder to see the mural that he made of Vi, and he says, I used to dream the Undercity could be like this, but somewhere I got consumed by all of the ways it wasn't. And that ties into, I think, what we were trying to get across with like our slight concern or minor frustration, whatever you want to call it, with Ekko, is that where he was prioritizing his time is a temporary fix to what the people of Zaun were dealing with. The tree starts to wither away, and you get the sense of what they had established can't really last. It's not really sustainable because of what Piltover was doing with that environment, and the shimmer and the technology that they were creating made it virtually impossible. And so until you deal with that, what you're trying to build here, it won't last. You know? And I think he finally came to that realization also, which I think was necessary for his story as well.
Yeah.
Side note, for some reason, that kind of reminded me of Across the Spider-Verse, their little dynamic that they had.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought I was bugging, but then I went online on Twitter and I saw a few people say the same. Like, okay, so I'm not crazy. Like the vibes felt very similar. The romantic and the way that they drew them. I don't know. Maybe it was just like a small minority, but for some reason the vibes picked up on that because there's a multiverse thing that's sort of happening there.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a biracial love story.
Well, there's also that. Yeah.
I will say Heimerdinger again. He had me really irked.
Yeah, I was thinking about him.
Because here's my thing. Now, he redeemed himself in the end. He did. But when Ekko pops up and Ekko's like, bro, how long have you been here? It was like years. Okay, that's like 3 years, right? And there's no sense of urgency to go back. And that bothered me so bad because I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you're one of the people responsible for the problem in the first place. And you're just cool kicking it over here and leaving everybody back there behind to handle it on their own.
Yeah.
Like, I just found that so irksome. I lied earlier when I said that I had only one complaint. I do have one other complaint. I do think that the one other thing that they really dropped the ball on was they never really gave Heimerdinger the criticism that I think he deserves. He just kind of went out like a hero and like, okay. But like, there was never, not even from Heimerdinger really.
Like a self-reflective sort of moment where he acknowledges what he did.
Yes, and I don't know. So like when Ekko shows up and Ekko is the one that has to have all the urgency to go back, which to me I'm like, that tells me a lot about the type of person Ekko is, because Ekko is one person that if he were to decide to just stay in the universe, I personally wouldn't have judged him. Yeah. Like I remember while we were watching it, you literally saying, "Oh, I'd never leave."
Yeah.
Like I think I would be bothered by the thought of like leaving behind people that I knew were in trouble, but I would not judge a person like Ekko, who's literally given all of his life basically to trying to help people and to try and solve this problem for people, to say like, I think I'm just going to chill here in this place where I can be happy. I wouldn't have judged him for it, but I think it says so much about his character that never even crossed his mind.
Yeah.
He immediately was determined to find a way to go back to a situation that is so much worse. Say goodbye to people that he has lost, who he will never see again because they're not even alive in the universe that he comes from, and go back to help them. And Heimerdinger's privileged self who's lived a life full of comfort
Let's just
for
stay here.
thousands and thousands of years, has absolutely no sense of urgency to go back and help people? No.
He's running from his problems. I think he realized the role he played in creating this sort of, class system with Piltover and Zahn, and he's like, I would prefer to not have to deal with it.
It doesn't feel like we as viewers are actually supposed to be critical of Heimerdinger just by the way that the show presents him.
Yeah.
And so it feels like there's just like a little bit of a gap there. Like the way that he is presented and all is like, oh, he's just a kind, wise, short little man. It doesn't feel like the show itself is offering that criticism very clearly for us. And that's what kind of frustrates me.
But I did kind of appreciate it, those scenes. I think Jinx or Powder and Ekko, it was his second chance. I do question where Jayce was like, did it have to be like this? Like, was there no other way? And I'm reading this as like, was there not a way for us to use the Hextech in a more safe, more responsible way?
I don't think that there is a world
where Hextech could have been safe.
I don't think so. I think that once you introduce something with that capability, whether it was Jayce and Viktor or somebody else, it is going to happen. Once the possibility is there and presented, then there's always going to be people in the world.
Yeah, there's no way to. I mean, you saw Oppenheimer kind of, I think, touched that a little bit as well. Like, they had this, and then they created the atomic, and then the hydrogen. Like, you won't be able to stop yourself. Humanity and that's a probably good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, the world that we saw of that prosperity kind of shows like you didn't need it.
Yeah. No.
That technology is not going to be the thing that equals a playing field when you've got all of these other problems sort of dealing with.
This is exactly how I feel about AI and all these things that scientists are doing now.
Yeah.
I'm always like, I'm not an anti-intellectualist or anything, but sometimes I'm like, don't you think we've progressed enough?
No, I think that's a valid concern.
We've become technologically advanced enough?
I think there's a genuine conversation that I've seen across the political spectrum, honestly, from conservatives all the way to the most leftists, of like, there should be a moral responsibility of having the conversation with how much we progress in the science world, in the technology world. And I feel like that feels odd to say out loud until you really think it through. Like, this will eliminate jobs. And we are not in a situation where like inequality is something that would be unavoidable. Like that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, it already is.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like,
it'll get worse.
Exactly. Like if this idea of AI was coming in tandem with like universal basic income, or there were like more conversations of like raising the minimum wage, or like creating like helping with like the housing and student loan crisis, then okay. Now, nah, I'm sorry.
I was confused by Viktor.
Why?
Well, because in the last arc, when we meet him in that community that he had created, he was in a space where he seemed to still see the value in humanity. Like when he touches Vander and he's like, I'm willing to sacrifice myself because what this person represents and what he believes in and who he is so valuable that I want to bring him back. And then when we start this episode and they approach him, Medarda approaches him with the proposition of creating this army full of, I don't know, his minions.
Ultrons.
And he's just like, yeah.
Well, I saw that as, one, the war that took place, and then I think perhaps a little bit of a sense of betrayal with what Jayce ended up trying to do in that moment. I don't think he was trying to work with Medarda. I think he was using Medarda with the eventual goal of, at some point, I'm going to be controlling all of you all. Like, I think Medarda thought there was like some agreement that perhaps Viktor would end his pursuit after creating armies that would not have to fear like being sort of like unalived. I don't think Viktor had that same vision. I think Viktor had the idea of like, sure, I'll let you do that because right now you would sort of be a bit of an obstacle. But eventually my goal is for including you to all become my Like, I think he just says as like, he says like next stage of evolution. I think that's just how I sort of seen it.
I guess it does make sense because he has always been somebody who, I mean, Jayce says it at the end, where he's like, you've always been a person who's obsessed with fixing what's broken.
Yes, yeah.
And he sees humanity. I think, yes. Okay, this makes sense. After what happens with Jayce, because he creates this haven where there's no violence and there's no weaponry and everything is, and then Jayce comes and destroys it all. And then I think he's like, the only way to fix what's truly broken with humanity is for there to not be humanity.
Yeah. We've thought a lot about, like what Jayce represents. And initially, you sort of look at him and Viktor's character arc as like, cautionary tale with artificial intelligence and the understanding that like this is a potential future that like we as like people can kind of hold. But I do also think there was a bit of a mini character arc / growth that Jayce went through when he went into that new reality or alternate reality he was living in. Like for one, they kept juxtaposing what he was experiencing versus what Ekko was experiencing. It's like roles were kind of switched to an extent where now he's having to suffer through things versus Ekko's having to like live a very like peaceful sort of experience. But then I also felt like Jayce needed to go through that encounter in this alternate world because I don't think he would have been able to reach Viktor unless he experienced this particular hardship. I think he got a firsthand experience of what it truly felt like to live as a person in the underworld, like having to resist the constant urge of like nihilism and cynicism or like letting your like emotions become hardened. Like you saw a little bit of that in the way that he was reacting, like the food that he had to eat. He also became crippled a little bit, like he had to wear a crutch because his leg was injured, very similar to Viktor. It was a semi-reality check for Jayce because Jayce is not an antagonist, but there were a few moments where it did feel like either he was intentionally trying to outshine Viktor or he understood just that who he was, his stature, people were attracted to him. He was a brilliant young mind. And there were a few moments where he allowed the thrill of that experience result in him like neglecting Viktor. Like I think he could have pushed a little bit harder in keeping Viktor in the loop. Like there were a few moments in season 1 where it was like you're on your way out to like have the crowd cheer you on and like, oh, you should be up there as well. And Viktor's like, no, that's not really my scene. That's not a real invitation. Like, you know what I mean? Like you could have done a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was also part of the guilt that he needed to reconcile with. Like there were other things that led from Viktor to point A to point B. Viktor had his own demons that he had to deal with, but also you were not being a good friend to Viktor also. And I think that perhaps I read that as like he's able to really use like the proper language now to get through to Viktor. And this time he doesn't leave him behind. He could have escaped when Viktor gave him the outs, like you need to leave because he knows that this, meta world that Viktor was sort of existing in was about to collapse. And Jayce decides to stay. And I saw that as like, all right, now you're actually being like a true friend.
I also think he needed to experience the consequences of his own actions.
Yes.
I think he had theories about them, but was not living them firsthand because of the position that he was in. And so he had to see it. Yeah. One thing I did find a little bit frustrating, even watching that with him, though, is that the thing that got through to him was when his own people and his own community were destroyed. Like, what shook him up was, oh my gosh, Piltover is destroyed. You kind of low-key already knew that you were destroying Zaun.
Yeah.
You kind of knew that already. What catapulted him into action,
my home,
was seeing the destruction of Piltover.
Yeah.
Which I found it makes sense.
Listen, whatever the catalyst is, I guess it is what it is.
Like, it got you where you needed to go.
Yeah.
I'd also, there is still so much privilege, threaded in this story because, then it gets you to a point where you are now begging for the people of Zaun to come. And it's not just to your defense. It's also to their defense, obviously. But it's and he kind of acknowledges it. He says something along the lines of, I know I have no right to ask you for help or, something like that. But there is still just this,
the nerve.
Yeah, there's just something about that that's irksome. And I don't think I think it's a good thing that they included it in the story because I think that is a real life reality.
Yeah.
Because the things that are going to impact the people on top are always going to impact the people on bottom the worst. we all get called into this fight because we know, like, okay, I mean, like, I gotta do it because, like, obviously it's gonna impact me too, but it does feel like you guys are a little late to the conversation.
Like the Democratic Party.
I mean, the Democratic Party also, just like the way that the Democratic Party talks about Black women, the way that, honestly, a lot of people on the left talk about Black women as, like, this...
The heroes, the sacrificial sort of saviors.
Like we've discussed this before. I personally think that it's gotten a little detached from reality. Still, it represents this idea that I think they're kind of getting at in the show that's like, we don't really have a choice. Like the people of Zon don't really have a choice.
Right.
Like when push comes to shove, it's like, well, I mean, we're here now. Like we've been telling you like what you guys are doing is a problem.
Yeah.
But we're here now, and I guess we have to do this.
You created the Hextech. You created Shimmer. They're like in shock when Savika looks at Jayce and's like, and like dips out. And as I'm watching, I'm like, no, I get it. I get it. We did not create this situation at all.
This is like literally the conversation that we're having like every election cycle, like all the time. It's this thing of like, I really wish I could just let you sit back and solve your own problems. But the problem is your problems become my problems.
Times 2.
Exactly. And so now here I am. And then, it's like they talk about it like this coalition, like the Democratic coalition. And even in the show, they present it as like this, it's not really what this is.
You didn't give us a choice but to join.
Yeah, it's not really what this is.
It's either we join to help fix your mistakes or we all perish. Like, One thing I did want to say about Savika, I think as the story has gone on, I have learned to appreciate her character a lot more. Primarily because she, in my mind, is probably like the best version of a revolutionary in Zon. She always wanted to, I think, follow a leader that could have helped liberate Zon from Piltover. Now, cards stacked against her, Silco's there. She doesn't have that much of a choice. She looks at Vander, and Vander is just like, he's just like making booze in a bar. Like there's nothing really going on.
Don't cover him like that.
No, I love Vander. I'm just saying. But she didn't love Silco. There was a few moments where she was like, I'm always here having to clean up the mess that you made. And then when there was that moment where things could have gone south with Silco and the betrayal could have happened, he asked Savika, like, did you ever think of like betraying me? Because, Silco goes on the whole rant of like loyalty. And she doesn't outright say no. She just says, I wouldn't have done it for someone like him. Which to me, I'm like,
if someone better had come along.
Exactly. And I think that's why she looks to Jinx and she's like,
we could really do something with this.
I think I found a person. I appreciated that because her being the one to now have that seat at the table, she deserved that in Piltover. And it's not just like a seat at the table where like, you got like a Black person in the Supreme Court, like Clarence Thomas is out here cooning it up. Like he has a seat at the table, but like something up here is not right. She's gone through the experience. She gets it. And now she's using her seat at the table to try her best, like to make sure that things don't happen again.
I think she's a character where her morals are very clear and consistent.
Yes.
And I do appreciate that. And I would say she might almost be unique in that regard in the show.
Honestly.
Outside of Ekko, probably.
Yeah, I'd probably say that. The two of them probably stand in a tier of their own.
Yes, they have. She has a very clear code of ethics that she sticks to.
Right.
And applies. And always, the more we learned about her, the more clear it became that it was partially about her own survival, but also it seems like she has an understanding that her survival is tied to the survival of like Zon and the Undercity as well. Do you think that the direction that they took this story takes away from the idea that we had last week that this is not just like an anti-war story?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say I think so too.
They gave him the aliens are attacking the Earth and now we have to band together trope.
I don't think they were both sidesing it.
Nah.
But what I came away with, like the most consistent message that I came away with at the end of this season is I really think the whole story is about resisting the urge to dehumanize the other.
Yeah.
Like whoever that person is. And they do that on both sides, which I think can maybe like come across as like kind of annoying, like kumbaya, like, you know, like, but I think it's a valuable message. Like that's where I have currently been living in my head, in my politics. What really brought it home for me was what happened with Jayce and Viktor at the end, because where you thought Jayce was going was you thought he was going to destroy Viktor. Thought it was like, okay, well, Viktor is, we can't save him, right? Like, we can't bring him back. And so now we just have to take him out. And in the end, that's not what happens. In the end, what he does is he speaks to his humanity and heals him and brings him back.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a thread that we saw throughout the entire episode, was like so many characters were redeemed by the fact that other people refused to give up on their humanity. We saw that with Jinx. Like, Vi refused, no matter what happened, to give up on the idea that like Powder was still there.
Yeah.
And you see Caitlyn come around to that too. Same thing. I feel like we saw that with Vander and Silco. Like, I don't think Vander ever really gave up on Silco. We know that because he wrote the letter.
Yeah.
I feel like we saw that with Mel and her mom. She was trying, and even in the end,
when she kind of with the black rose.
Yeah. When
she
I don't think she ever stopped seeing the humanity in her mom, but I think she saw that even with that, there was no other end for her.
Yeah.
But even in their last moments together, there was something healing. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of people who won't like that, because I think a lot of people right now have a politics that is very us versus them. Sure. And I understand that, because a lot of things right now feel that way. Mm-hmm. I feel like it is good and healthy to resist that mentality, because like we have to convince people to agree with us.
Listen, it's true. I think progressives and leftists got to realize we are in the minority. Now, you can probably look to polling and be like, well, a lot of people agree with like, whether it's like universal health care or like things with housing and raising minimum wage. I get that. But that's not how they're voting. It's not even coming close. And if we don't start like convincing people, we're going to continue losing elections like this. It's really, there's really no, I remember Hassan Piker was on offline with John Favreau, and John was kind of talking to him about that idea of like Democrats used to be able to win in states like Montana and Kansas and Missouri. I mean, Ohio, all of those are gone. The pathway to getting a supermajority in Congress, I don't think we are going to see that in the next like 20 to 25 years unless we start doing some convincing. Mm-hmm. These broad sweeping changes, you're not going to get that with 49 votes or with 50 votes. And I do think some of that is othering. Like I've told you about that YouTube channel, More Perfect Union, where they, leftist group, they go around and they're in rural parts of this country and realizing that we are on maybe like 6 out of 10 issues are speaking the same language. Mm-hmm. If we were able to accomplish 6 out of 10 of those things, the scapegoats of immigrants and queer people probably wouldn't land as strong. Mm-hmm. There wouldn't be an other there that you can then throw at them. And I'm not giving them an out. Like, obviously they need to do better, and but conservatives wouldn't have a scapegoat. Only other thing that I would say about this season, I thought that the way that they ended this was incredible, but there was something that I did notice. Again, spoilers if you haven't watched it. I'm pretty sure Jinx is alive.
Really?
Yeah. So the look of joy. All right. Remember in season 1, I don't know if you would remember, but in season 1, there is a scene where Jinx sees like a big ship / blimp or whatever. And she was like, one day I'm going to ride those things. Well, Powder says it. Mm-hmm. And that's important. I think the blimp that we saw flying away in that last scene was Powder having that moment. Caitlyn's looking at like the architecture of the building where we believe that's where Jinx and Vander die. And she's studying it for some reason, and then she pauses and then she laughs. And a lot of people are thinking that she had finally realized that like, oh, Jinx has done it again. She found a way out to survive, which was something that had been frustrating Caitlyn a lot this season. Like, Jinx kept finding a way to get out of these situations. And there's 2 things that other people have noticed. Vi is obviously like extremely happy. So in that last scene. So either Vi knows that Jinx survived or Vi doesn't know. And the other thing that they pointed out was Caitlyn, while Vi's happy, has a look, like a more serious look on her face, which people are saying she's contemplating if she wants to tell Vi, wondering if like, will Vi take that information and be at peace with it, or will she go after Jinx again? So there's a lot of thoughts there. But one thing that I do think would be a happier ending is if Caitlyn knew, Vi didn't know, but Vi was at peace with knowing that like Jinx was okay with them sort of moving on. Like you didn't have to keep saving her anymore. Mm-hmm. So to me, that theory makes sense. I don't know why they would show that blimp and show Caitlyn studying that architecture unless there was something there that they wanted us to take from it, in my opinion.
Maybe I need to go back and rewatch.
Yeah.
I guess I would be okay with either one.
Sure.
I mean, I found the ending obviously sad. I mean, you remember when we were watching it, and I was like, there's no need for tragedy at the end. I was like, we don't have to do it. We won.
Yeah.
We won. We don't need to do this.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a kind of beauty in that ending, even if Jinx isn't alive.
Sure.
Just because you kind of saw it, like Jinx was very tired.
Yeah.
And she was very tired. She was carrying the weight of all these things that she had done. And I don't think she knew how to forgive herself for it. And to have her like last moments be with Vander, even though it's not Vander that we know. When it happened, I was sad, but I was also like, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm okay if that is how she
goes out. Yeah. I mean, even if she was alive, she's able to leave Piltover behind.
Yeah.
And go someplace else and live happily ever after. Either way you look at it, I think the story was written in a way where that both could work.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, appreciate all of you that have been tuning in, watching this with us. This has been really fun. Always love reading the comment sections for things that you guys have to say. And for the new people, and there's a few people that I've seen the comment sections like, oh, I came across your video, followed, loved you. We really appreciate that. That's super exciting for us. Anyways, with that, we appreciate you all so much, and we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.